Hello, this is Peter Vokon from Orca Realty. I'm going to be explaining how to sign a tenancy agreement and a few things to look out for, and how to represent your owner or your client in the best manner. This is probably one of the most important things where things could go wrong, and knowing this is a skill that I guess should be perfected over the years, or you should work on and really perfect. Okay, so the main point when I'm signing a lease is to get to know your tenant and understand that this person will in some sense help you to do your job properly, or will make your life difficult if this relationship is not established at the beginning in the right way. And so by signing the lease in a very organized manner, with everyone's expectations being met, or at least understand their expectations, and that you explain your expectations of them, then hopefully that sets up a proper relationship that could be established and move forward through the lease. Okay, so the first thing that I focus on when dealing with a tenant is to build some type of rapport. In your lease, of course, before you're signing the lease, you'll be doing the credit check and reference checks on who these people are, and so you will know a little bit about them. But normally, when you meet them, of course, find out what's happening in their lives, why they're moving, what they do for a living, and in general, ask them why they ended up renting this property. And this will help, of course, understanding who they are and what their situation is like. Okay, so after I do that, we will go through, and I will go through the main pages of the lease. And right here is the first page of the lease. Now, there's two types of leases that we sign. One is when we're managing a property, and then one is if we're not managing a property. If we are managing the property, of course, Orca Realty and our contact information is here. And then the bottom, under emergency contact numbers, it will have our 24 call-in center and our repairs at orcarealty.ca. So that will be there. If we're not managing this unit or this house, and it's a tenant placement only, there is another lease that is listed on Dropbox where this logo is not there, and the address for service and the phone number for the emergency phone contact is not there, and you would just need to put the owner's phone number and their address of service. Okay, so important again. So you have the landlord's name, and of course the tenant's name. If it's a husband and wife, both people should be on the lease. It definitely helps us if there's ever an issue with collecting rent, so we could go after two people instead of just one. The other thing that it's important is that when you look at the street address, of course, make sure you get the right address. Also, if it is a house, make sure that it's a full house or just basement or top two levels. So under unit, if it is a basement, so you just put basement only, and or top two levels, whatever it is, it should be spelled out on this line, so that everyone understands what exactly they're getting. Address for service, that's our address if we're managing it, and of course emergency phone number. I do mention this to them, and I spent just a minute explaining this, that if there's ever an issue with the house, we expect them to call us, not necessarily a plumber or electrician or whoever they think that they should call. We do have people on our staff that could go out and deal with these issues, and so we want them to call us first instead of calling any plumber to deal with something that we could probably do much cheaper down the line. So the instructions here is that they do have to call us. Okay, so that is the first page of the lease. Okay, hopefully this is filled up properly, and this gives you a good start. Second page of the lease. The second page and the third page really are the meat of the lease, which really gives you the when the tenancy starts. So right here, you put the date. Here as well, it says 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, in the past, we've had it happen where the tenant will ask, "Is it possible to get early possession?" And before you give early possession to any tenant, number one, understand that you're creating a lot of work for yourself, from a sense that you have less time to prepare the property so that it could be properly occupied. And so understand that one thing. The number two thing you should realize is that before you give early possession, make sure, double check with the owner that they understand what is being done. Some owners are okay with it. Some owners will actually want to get paid. It's like, well, if they're going to be living there 2 or 3 days before, they should pay. They should pay, whatever the amount of rent. Okay. So, and the last thing, and probably the most important, is the liability. So, if you're going to be giving early possession, meaning that the lease starts on the 1st of May, and you want to give him possession April the 28th, and because the place is empty and helps you out, really, it should be changed here. So the tenancy commences on April the 28th, although they're prepaying the first months of rent. Let's just say if the rent is $4,000, that $4,000 would represent the first month plus the days, as an example, in April. So I'll explain that a little bit later on page 3. Okay, so make sure that if you're giving early possession, it should state on here. Okay. On the second point B, number 1 is for the fixed length of time. It should match. It should say 1 year, and the end date should be, when it ends. Please make sure you calculate the property properly. The other thing as well, if the lease starts on the 15th of the month, as an example, we should always have the lease end at the end of the month. So don't go from the 15th to the 15th. It doesn't make sense. And if you just explain it to the tenant that that it is everyone's best interest to end the lease at the end, as everyone moving forward, 90% of the properties that are listed for rent are available at the beginning of the month, and so when they're looking for their next property, this will be much easier for everyone. Okay, so then if it starts April the 15th, make sure that the lease ends 30th of May or 30th of June or whatever it is. Okay. So you put the end date there. Of course, with our situation at Orca Realty, we believe that the lease should always be a term lease. So on point 2, it should say, you should check that off and have the tenant initial that if the tenants don't agree with the landlord or with us that the lease will extend, then the lease will end 1 o'clock on the date of the end of the lease. So, and they would need to initial right here under the tenancy. Okay. So I do explain that, of course, and tenants will say, well, is it possible if I go month to month after? And what we normally say, and what I say is, listen, I appreciate what you're asking here, but unfortunately, all the properties that we manage, and we manage hundreds, none of them go month to month. And the reason why that is that it protects both parties having it the way it is. Number 1, you're protected because the owner cannot give you notice, a 2 months notice for you to vacate. So that's number 1. So you're protected. You are guaranteed to live here for 1 year, 2 years, whatever we agree to. And number 2, at least the owner is protected because they understand that there's a beginning and the end of the lease. So they know if anything, they could move back into it or do whatever they want with it, and they know when it ends. So both parties can understand that there is no gray area. And so when you go month to month, there's a lot of gray area, and for everyone, it really loses control. So that's why we do it. Okay, and that's how I explain it. Okay, so I've never had anyone explain to me or convince me that, hey, I want a month to month lease, and they explain to me why we should do it. We just don't do it. Okay, the liquidated damages clause. The liquidated damages clause is quite simple. What I normally do, and this is why I actually try to have a conversation with them, understand who they are, what they do, why are they renting, what's happening in their life, what are they planning to do, and all those questions will help me understand how to explain this liquidated damages. Okay, so there's 3 ways you could, in a sense, break a lease with us. One is the legal way, which is number 1. You can assign a lease to another tenant if there's 6 months or more left on the lease. So, so what that means is that the tenant, you could go out there, find somebody else, and as the landlord's agents, we have to be reasonable with our allowance when it comes to you finding a tenant and us allowing it. So that's one option. It is a free option. It is actually structured under the Residency Tenancy Act, and you have the right to do that as a tenant. Okay. The second way is, and it's spelled out here under liquidated damages, is that if for whatever reason, you don't like the house, or you're going back to you're going back to Mexico, or whatever is happening in your life, you have a right to send us a letter that is signed and dated, that states the address and when you're looking to move out, and then you're breaking the lease, and sign and date and send that to us. As soon as we receive that, that means we got legal notice, and you've paid. In this case, it's half a month's rent plus GST. That is the liquidated damages to us. So this liquidated damages is a predetermined amount of money that the owner would be out of pocket if you break the lease. And so it is something that is understood that two people are making a commitment to each other, but you as the tenant do have a right under the Residency Tenancy to break this lease by paying a predetermined amount of money to the owner for his potential loss. So you pay that, and that creates that basically starts a process for us to re-rent it. Now that is the minimum charge you would lose if you were to break the lease. It doesn't mean that if we do not rent it the following month, as an example, you're still responsible until we find it, until we find a new tenant. And so that's something it's important that you understand, that your obligation doesn't end when you move out. It ends when we find a tenant. And of course, we have to prove that we are trying to rent it. Okay, so that's the second way to try to basically break the lease. And the third way, and which we explain to all the tenants, and I do this myself because it's very important, is that we do have a rent rebate program with Orca Realty. And how the rent rebate program works is that a lot of the times Orca Realty, or we are the first introduction to real estate, and so you are, as a tenant, might be looking to buy a property. You're relocating from other part of the world, and this is the first time you're actually buying. In British Columbia, working with a realtor doesn't cost you anything, and we represent in a transaction for a purchase. You have two agents. You have the listing agent and the buyer's agent. In this case, what we do at Orca Realty, we will help you transition from being a tenant to being a buyer by a process called rent rebate. So if this ever happens, you just need to contact us. We will introduce you to anywhere from 5 to 10 realtors who could be potentially licensed with Orca Realty, or with 4 or 5 different brokerages locally that have a very good, knowledgeable realtors that we have established a relationship with. So these agents we will introduce you to. You choose one, and of course it doesn't cost anything to work with them. Those people would in turn help you buy a house. And when you do buy a house, what we do is we would be able to release you from the obligation of the lease. So one thing we do is the liquidated damages, which we mentioned on point 2. You no longer have to pay that. So Orca Realty would pick that up internally. Okay, that's number 1. And number 2, we would also rebate you anywhere from 2 to 4% of the rent you paid us for using the system. So for yourself, as an example, if your rent was $5,000, you're looking at anywhere from $150 to $200 a month rebate times 12, so $2,400 if you use our system. And so basically it's a win-win for everyone. It's a win-win that you're able to get out of this lease, and in turn you're also able to use a reputable realtor to buy your property. Okay, so those are the 3 ways that you can break a lease. The last part is something that we just do for Orca Realty, and this is something important as a property manager, that you should know who the tenant is and what the situation is like. And so that's why you want to keep in touch, because they would say, oh yeah, you know what, I'm interested in buying, and they say, oh, great. So you make a note for yourself, and then of course follow up with them as they're moving in, as they're living there, because that knowledge and your introduction to a realtor will help you secure a referral and a commission into your pocket. Okay. So point number 2 on the same page, page 2, is the rent. So in the amount, it should say, of course, the dollar amount payable to Orca Realty. If we are not managing it, it should say the owner's name right there. There's a line right here, so it should say the owner's name. And then on the page where it says the checks to be delivered, if we're not managing it, the owner's name should be here. So these things are, when you are signing a lease that is not managed by us, these things will be crossed out, and you need to fill that in. And the last point, which is on what's included and what's not included. So this is quite important. And if you look at number 2C, it says right there, included and excluded in the rent, and it says check mark are included, X not included in the rent, and N is not applicable. So in West Vancouver, water, sewer, and recycling is not included in the rent. So therefore, you would have to cross that out. It says water and city utility. And then, so you would cross that out, electricity, cross it out, gas, and so forth. And you would put 0 beside it. Okay, so it's not included. So you put X and 0. For lawnmower, I would normally put, if the owner's not giving a lawnmower, I just put not applicable. So that N, strata move-in fee if it's a house, then of course you put not applicable. Stove, oven, fridge, you check that off. Dishwasher, you check it off if it has a dishwasher. Carburetor, built-in vacuum, vacuum hoses. If you do not know when you're signing this lease, and if those things are not there, I would just cross it off. Okay. Worst case scenario is that they're there, and so the tenant gets a bonus, right? Window coverings. If you do not know 100% that all the window coverings are there, then put you check it off, window coverings, and you put some windows beside it. Okay. Because sometimes what we've had it happen, you know, a bedroom is missing a blind, and the tenant says, well, no, they're supposed to be covered, so, you know, I want the owner to provide those. Okay, so then at least know what's included. Okay, cable vision, of course, to cross that out because it's not included. Laundry, check that off. If it has a pool, hot tub, or gardening, these things, of course, you should understand that you've had the discussion already with your owner, who's paying for pool maintenance, hot tub maintenance, and gardening. These things are some things that you negotiate on a lot of the times. So this negotiation should have already happened prior to you signing the lease. Okay, storage, if there's a storage in the house, you put it in the house or in a shed, you fill that out. If they're, let's say, including a freezer, you put that in there. If there's a furniture, if you're renting a house that's furnished, you would put furnish, and you check that off, and then beside it you would write C addendum A. So therefore you would add an addendum to this lease. Okay, Whirlpool, you know, it's a self-explanatory. The quarterly city utility bill. So this is the same thing as the water city utility, and the reason why we have a box underneath it is because we want them to, that means you had a discussion with them to say, listen, this comes quarterly, it's going to be $125 or whatever it is, and you need to pay it. It's not included in the rent. So you would have them initial that, okay, and then of course figure out if there's a fireplace, you check that off, and parking if it's for how many cars. So this part really is probably the most important page of this lease, because it explains a lot of things that, and this is where errors are made and can be costly if not done properly. Okay, so that is page 2. So page 3 of the lease, this goes through the deposits. Of course, if you're dealing with a pet deposit, security deposit, it's half a month's rent. Pet deposit, it is also half a month's rent, a maximum. Okay, I've had tenants say, you know what, I can't afford it, or can I pay less? The dog is so small, or it's just it's an old dog, it doesn't do anything. So this is a discussion you need to have with your own owner. I normally say, listen, you got a dog. I'm sorry that, you know, I've seen dogs create, you know, damage through digging and chewing and so forth. So, you know, the owner has a more right for, you know, you have more possibility of damaging the house, and that's why we're asking for it. So normally I have them pay the full damage deposit, pet deposit, so basically pay a full month's rent. At some occasions, if it makes sense, then we will allow less. So that's up to you and your owner to decide on. So this is quite important. Point 3D, it says the tenant will prepay and then it says of the rent. So in this case, you'd put either the first month or first month and 3 days. So as an example, when I was talking about the lease starting April the 1st, but you want to give them early possession as an example, in here, if the early possession was going to start April the 29th, but really they're going to be paying rent from the 1st of May, you would in here, you would put 1 month, so April 28th, 29th, and the 30th, plus the month of May. So you would say 1 month and 3 days. So it says the tenant will prepay the 1 month, 3 days of the rent in the amount of, in this case, if the rent was $4,000, and you put $4,000. So in this case, you're not charging the tenant for the 3 days, but what you are doing is starting the lease and the tenant's liability from that point, so that you're covered. So the tenant will prepay the 1 month and 3 days of the rent in the amount of $4,000, and it says this is to be paid prior to possession of the property. So therefore, that you're getting that hopefully today. I would get it in a draft form. So payable to Orca Realty. Seldomly we will allow personal checks, but just get used to asking for a draft, okay? And it says, and then you put that in there. So, and then underneath it says this amount as directed by the tenant will only be applied to their, and you would say, first month and 3 days of the tenancy, and you put that in there. And the rest is self-explanatory, okay? So now we've come to the kind of where these are additional terms of the lease. And on the page 3, there's certain things that you could just cross out. And when you're dealing with a house, so anything to do with a strata, you could cross out. So point A, point B, you could cross out. Gas fireplace, wood burning fireplace. This is quite important that you know what it is. So from the MLS or from your inspection, please make sure that if it is a gas fireplace, it is a gas fireplace. If it's a wood burning fireplace, you put it in there, because a gas fireplace will be much easier to run than a wood burning fireplace, and so please make sure you put that in correctly. Bicycles, it doesn't apply with houses, but you could cross that out if it doesn't apply. Motorized vehicle, also to do with condos, you could cross that out when you deal with the house. Point G, it's also to do with the house, non-covered areas. Security doors, basically if they're renting a condo, this clause explains that they need to, when they're exiting the property or entering the property, they need to make sure the door shuts behind them, otherwise they could get fined. And it's not them that gets fined, it's the owner that gets fined. So in this case, it just says that if they do get fined, the owner gets fined, that the tenant will pay. So that's basically what that means, okay? In-suite laundry, make sure that when you do the laundry, that you're there. And then, of course, common property, this is to do with, again, with to do with strata, is that like to follow the rules of a pool or common property that, renting, let's say, a gym or a meeting room or something like that. So that would be as part of that, okay? So if it's a house, you just cross that out. If it is, in this case, if it's a house that we're renting out, in here it says yard work. So this part, which says the yard work, should be the same as page 2. So in this case, on page 2, it said if gardening is included, so therefore it was checked off here. It was checked off right there, gardening. Then on page 3, it should be also checked off, and it says it should be the responsibility of the landlord. If it's not included, of course, then it should be responsible of the tenant. So that is important that those things match to the point 2. All right. Gutters. Of course, the gutters are responsible of the owner. Snow removal is responsible of the tenant. Yeah, this we now have on our contract a hydro split clause. This is only we have that in there when it comes to a house that's shared. So meaning there's a tenant upstairs, there's a tenant downstairs. So it says the tenant will pay. Now in this case, if you have an upstairs tenant and they're paying 75% of the rent, 75% of the utilities, and the downstairs tenant is paying 25%. In this case, it says the hydro split, the tenant will pay, and you would put 75% portion of the you would write in there BC Hydro, FortisBC, and then you'd also put down the city utility. So that's if the house is in West Vancouver, you'd put the city utility, and you need to estimate. In this case, and you would say bill 2, and you would put Orca Realty, and you need to estimate amount. So just to give you just a ballpark amount for a house that is 3,000 square feet, the estimated cost of a house like that for gas and electricity is around $4,000 a year. Okay, so if you take $4,000 a year, and let's have a look, $4,000 a year, divide that by 12. Okay, times that by 0.7. So, 4,000 a year, divided by 12, and times that by 0.07. Okay, it's 233. That is for BC Hydro and FortisBC. And then, so that's 233. And then if it's $125 per month for the city utilities, and they're responsible for 70% of that. So you got plus 233. So together, I would calculate that for them and say, listen, we're going to add $320 to your rent on a monthly basis, and we would basically prepay. As you're paying rent, you're also paying these things, okay? And then there's a box right here, and they need to sign there or initial there, okay? It's important that they understand this because we've had some issues. The other thing as well, on this part, if you're dealing with a house that is there's a difference in utilities. If you go to page 2, where it says what's included and excluding the rent, if these people are, as an example, paying 70% of the utilities, therefore you would need to put in here that the electricity, that 30% is included, right? So 30% is included, and then 70% they pay for. So hopefully that makes sense. If you're signing a lease that actually has an up and down component to it, please just ask me, because it's quite important that this is done properly, okay? Rest of the stuff is self-explanatory. I'm just going to mention a few of the things. Animals, make sure that you put either has agreed or has not agreed. If you have agreed on a pet, please make sure you put down not just a dog, but you put the dog, the breed, the age, and the weight. Okay, and the reason why that is, if the dog dies, unfortunately, the owners only agreed on that dog. They haven't agreed to a puppy. They haven't agreed to 3 dogs. They've only agreed to that dog, and that's why you have to be specific about that. Okay. The rest of the stuff, I normally basically say to the tenant, I say, listen, we could go through this by one point, but I'm just going to touch on the main points. You can review this after. So there's some tenants that will say, no, I want to read the whole thing. No problem. So I will just pass it on, and I will go back to work as they read it. Okay, I'm not going to be explaining the whole thing. If there's something they don't like, they could just ask me. Okay, so this lease that you should kind of know inside out. One thing that I do point out on vacating, that's page 4, point W. I basically tell them that we're going to be doing a move-in inspection. We will take inventory of the property, of how it is, and they need to bring it back to the condition of how they received it. So that's basically what that says. Okay, page 5. I mentioned the late payment NSF. We tell them that we're going to be taking the rent electronically, and if it comes back NSF, and if it's late, there's a $50 service charge. The one other point that I do want to make sure is point BB, which is insurance. They do need to show you, before you give them possession, their property insurance, or sorry, the tenant insurance, which basically is to insure their contents, but more importantly, the liability if something goes wrong. So if one of the kids falls off a balcony or something, or someone's visiting and they trip on the stairs and they sue the owner, in this case, the liability of the tenant is covering that type of thing. Okay, so that's that. Insurance. I do also go through, the moving company. We do normally refer Move It as one of the companies that we deal with. They're a good company, and no one has had any issues with them, so we refer them. So I normally mention that. Live Christmas tree, I do ask them about that. If they do, are adamant about having a Christmas tree, then I cross that part out. That's point KK. Alterations, I do make sure, and this is something that it's important, that's point 00. If they're going to alter anything, paint anything, cut anything, please get our owner's approval to do that. Okay, we've had people cut down trees that they're not supposed to, and this is quite important that of course they don't do that. Okay, so mention that. I point that out. Okay. The other point as well is that point SS. This is quite important, and this is just to set up your move-in inspection. So make sure you spend a couple minutes explaining this. Point SS basically says you are going to get the property in the same condition plus this. Okay, so therefore, if you see the house and they're like, okay, we love the house, and then in this case, if you don't write anything here, and then you're doing the move-in inspection that says, well, no, we were told that we were going to be able to paint, or they're going to change this toilet. I said, well, listen, let's go have a look at your lease on page 6, and let's see what we wrote down here. And in this case, it basically states you're going to get the property how you saw it plus what we written down here. So if we didn't write anything here, then they're out of luck, realistically, if push came to shove. Okay, so normally I put down here that the property will be professionally cleaned. And anything that kind of came up through negotiation. So if they say, listen, I'll take the place, but I want the outside to be pressure washed, I would put that in here. And so it becomes part of the lease, and it becomes part of the liability for the owner to do, because that's part of the lease. Okay, so that's that point. So it's quite important that you put that in there. Otherwise, if you don't, then the tenant, then at least the tenant doesn't have a way to come back at you when you do the move-in inspection. Okay. Where the tenant, okay, so where the tenant takes possession. So this last point, it basically talks about that we do have 30 days to do with any repairs. And it's a point that something, and I mentioned it, that we as a company have a lot of people move in into properties, and we have we have a lot of demand on the first or the second of the month to fix things. And so legally, under this lease, that we have 30 days to fix stuff. But if it's to do with safety or security, of course, we fix it much faster. But if it's something small, then we really legally have 30 days. So then I would have them initial that as well. Okay. The rest of the stuff, the last point, which is repairs, I do point out that sometimes, when it comes to repairs, we might have to order a part. The main thing when you're dealing with a property management company, that everything has to be done in a reasonable manner, and so that's our main point that we have to kind of be within. Unfortunately, when it comes to ordering a part, it doesn't mean that having something sent from Germany is reasonable, but that's the reality of it. So if we have to order a part and you're out of, you don't have a fridge to use, that's unfortunately, your bad luck, and you have to live with it. Owner's not going to give you a new fridge while you wait for a part. So that's something that they have to realize. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So explain that, okay? The last part, which is point 8, F, and GG, talks about use. So I mentioned that the house is there for them to use, not necessarily to run a business out of. Okay, so they could have a business office, that's not a problem, but they cannot have selling stuff out of the property, or have a daycare or anything like that. Okay, if they're the last point is GG, which is if they're going to be vacating the property. Number one, make sure that they let someone know, someone's checking the house for them while they're away. Number two, they keep the heat on. And number three, they drip their faucets. So that means they just turn on the water just a little bit, so that the pipes in the house are moving, and so they don't freeze. We didn't have that situation this year because of the bad winter, so we're now mentioning that to them. Okay. If there's an addendum to this lease, this is where you would put it. So you'd put, in this case, you would put here an addendum. You check that off and you put addendum A, B, or C, whatever you put, and then it becomes part of this lease. Then name all other occupants not listed on page 1. So therefore, it would be if it was a husband and wife, and then 4 kids. So therefore, altogether 6 occupants, and then the 4 kids, you would write them on here, and the husband and wife would be on the top of the lease. Okay. Last part, which is number 5, which is signing. Okay, and so this is quite important that you understand this, and you should read this. This concept of what it means when the tenant signs and what could happen. So just read it because it's quite simple. The tenant signs it, so they sign this lease, they date this lease, they initial on page 2. The initial if it's a house that we're managing from an up and down standpoint. They also they initial page 4. That's on the hydro split. The initial on the repairs, so that we have 30 days, and they sign that. So that means the tenant has now committed, they paid a deposit. At that point, the owner or the landlord's agent or we could do 2 things. We could sign the thing and it's done and nothing has changed. Or we could change something. As soon as we change something or we amend something, then we need to send it back to the tenant for their initial. Now, at that point, if both parties don't agree, there is no contract. It doesn't mean if the tenant signs that there is a contract. The landlord always has a chance to change something in here, but it is the tenant's responsibility to initial the change and agree to it. Okay, so that's that. So they sign that, and that is your lease. I would tell you that get in the habit of not signing the lease, especially at the beginning when you don't know your client. Every client is different. Even if you're managing it, have them sign it, have them review it, so there is no ambiguity between your people's expectations. Have them sign it, and then as soon as it is signed, then on here you just write down. I write down final, and then I put email, and I send each party an email with a copy of this this lease. As soon as you send this copy of the lease to the tenant, then it is a finalized lease, and you cannot backtrack from that. So please make sure before you do that everything is finalized and everyone's happy about either some repairs that are in there that the owner has to do. So I hope this explains it. And then after this is signed, we do have a generic email which we send to the tenant, which basically says congratulations. It explains to them what they need to do, from opening up a BC Hydro bill, the Fortis BC cable and internet, and some expectations of what the next process is going to be. So understand that this part sets the tone for your move-in inspection, which can be the most difficult part of this. So if you do this properly and set the tenant's expectations and how things are going to work, then it starts a relationship in the right road, and it starts at this point. So I hope this was an informative video, and we will see you soon. Thank you.